During Thanksgiving, my aunt announced, "We're starting a family investment fund. Everyone contributes $10,000. I was the only one who actually paid. 6 months later, I discovered she'd used the money to buy a vacation home. I hired a lawyer, proved fraud, and had the property seized. She's been calling me family destroyer ever since. I, 34 am, thought I knew my family pretty well until last Thanksgiving changed everything. What started as a seemingly innocent investment proposal turned into the most expensive lesson of my life about trust, greed, and the lengths people will go to steal from their own blood. The whole thing began during our annual Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. My aunt, who had always been the self-appointed financial guru of the family, stood up during dessert with this grand announcement. She explained how she'd been researching investment opportunities and had discovered this amazing chance to pool our family resources for a collective investment fund. The way she presented it, we'd all contribute $10,000 each, and she'd manage the investments to grow our money together. She painted this picture of family unity and shared prosperity that honestly sounded too good to be true. But here's the thing about my aunt. She'd always been persuasive. She worked in real estate and had this way of making everything sound like the opportunity of a lifetime. She talked about diversified portfolios, market timing, and how family investments were safer because we could trust each other. My cousins nodded along enthusiastically, my parents seemed interested, and even my usually skeptical brother appeared convinced. The plan was simple, she explained. Everyone would contribute their $10,000 within the next month. She'd set up the investment accounts, and we'd meet quarterly to review our progress. She even promised to provide detailed statements and full transparency about where our money was going. It felt like she was offering us a chance to be part of something bigger than ourselves. I'll admit, I was hesitant at first. $10,000 wasn't pocket change for me, and I'd always been careful with my money. But seeing my entire family's enthusiasm and hearing my aunt's confident explanations about her investment experience, I started to warm up to the idea. She assured us that she'd done this kind of thing before with her own money and had seen excellent returns. Over the next few weeks, I watched as family members discussed the investment fund in our group chat. Everyone seemed excited about the quarterly meetings and the potential returns. My aunt sent us official-looking documents about the fund structure and investment strategies. She even created a family investment group email where she'd send us market updates and investment tips. When December rolled around, I was the first to transfer my $10,000 to the account my aunt had set up. I figured being prompt would show my commitment to the family venture. I sent her a text letting her know the money had been transferred, and she responded with gratitude and excitement about getting started. But then something strange happened. The weeks passed, and I didn't hear about anyone else making their contributions. When I asked about it in the family group chat, my aunt assured me that everyone was just waiting for their year-end bonuses or tax refunds. She said not to worry and that the fund would officially launch once everyone had contributed. January came and went. Then February. By March, I started getting suspicious about the lack of updates or progress reports. When I pressed my aunt for information, she told me she was still waiting for the other family members to contribute and that she didn't want to start investing until we had the full amount pooled together. That's when I decided to do some investigating on my own. I started casually asking my cousins about their contributions during family gatherings. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Not a single person had actually contributed their $10,000. Some claimed they were still saving up, others said they'd changed their minds, and a few admitted they'd never really intended to participate in the first place. I confronted my aunt about this revelation, and she seemed genuinely surprised that others hadn't followed through. She assured me that she'd been waiting to hear from everyone and suggested we give them more time. But something in her demeanor felt off. She was evasive when I asked about the account details and seemed uncomfortable when I mentioned wanting to see statements. My suspicions really peaked when I ran into my cousin at a coffee shop in April. He mentioned how impressed he was that my aunt had managed to buy a vacation home in the mountains. He talked about how she'd been posting pictures of this beautiful cabin on social media and how the family was planning to use it for gatherings. The timing seemed too coincidental to ignore. That evening, I went through my aunt's social media posts more carefully. Sure enough, there were photos of this gorgeous mountain cabin with captions about her new investment property and smart financial planning. The posts were dated from February, just a few months after I'd transferred my money to her investment fund. I felt sick to my stomach. The pieces were falling into place, and none of them painted a pretty picture. I'd been the only one foolish enough to actually contribute to the fund, and it appeared my aunt had used my money as a down payment for her personal vacation home. I spent the next few days gathering evidence. I printed out screenshots of her social media posts, collected our email exchanges about the investment fund, and documented the bank transfer I'd made. I also reached out to my family members to get written confirmations that they hadn't contributed any money to the fund. When I had enough evidence, I decided to confront my aunt directly. I called her and explained what I'd discovered. I told her about my cousin's comments regarding the vacation home and asked her to explain the connection between my investment and her new property purchase. Her response was everything I needed to confirm my suspicions. She became defensive immediately, claiming that the vacation home was a separate investment and that my money was still safely held in the family fund. But when I pressed her for account statements or proof of the fund's existence, she couldn't provide anything concrete. She tried to convince me that she'd used her own money for the cabin and that my contribution was still being held for the family investment. But the timeline didn't add up, and her explanations kept changing. Finally, she admitted that she'd temporarily borrowed from the fund to secure the property, but insisted she planned to pay it back once the investment started generating returns. That's when I realized I was dealing with outright fraud. My aunt had created a fake investment opportunity, collected my money under false pretenses, and used it for her personal benefit. The fact that she'd done this to family made it even more devastating. I gave her 1 week to return my money in full. I explained that I considered her actions fraudulent and that I expected immediate restitution. Her response was to become angry and defensive, claiming that I was being unreasonable and that family members should trust each other. She insisted that the vacation home would eventually benefit the entire family and that I should consider my contribution an investment in family unity. When the week passed without any repayment, I knew I had to take legal action. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases and explained the situation. He reviewed my evidence and confirmed that I had a strong case for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The legal process was more straightforward than I'd expected. My lawyer filed a lawsuit against my aunt, seeking the return of my $10,000 plus damages and legal fees. We also filed for a preliminary injunction to prevent her from selling or transferring the vacation home while the case was pending. My aunt's initial response was to hire her own lawyer and claim that the money had been a gift, not an investment. But the email trail and documentation I'd gathered clearly showed that she'd solicited the money under the pretense of a family investment fund. Her own social media posts about the investment property actually worked against her defense. The discovery process revealed even more damaging information. Bank records showed that my $10,000 had been transferred directly to the mortgage company for the vacation home within days of my contribution. There was no investment account, no fund management, and no intention to create the family investment opportunity she'd promised. During depositions, my aunt's story continued to change. First, she claimed the money was a gift. Then she said it was a loan. Finally, she admitted to using it for the vacation home, but insisted she'd planned to pay it back. Her inconsistent statements only strengthened my case. The most damaging evidence came from her own financial records. The timeline showed that she'd been shopping for vacation properties before the Thanksgiving announcement and had already put in an offer on the cabin before collecting my money. This proved premeditation and showed that the entire family investment fund had been a scheme to finance her personal purchase. 6 months after filing the lawsuit, we reached a settlement. My aunt agreed to transfer ownership of the vacation home to me in lieu of monetary damages. The property was worth significantly more than my original $10,000 contribution, but my lawyer argued that the additional value represented damages for fraud, emotional distress, and legal fees. The property transfer was completed through the court system, and I suddenly found myself the owner of a mountain cabin that I'd never wanted. My aunt was furious about losing her vacation home and began telling family members that I'd destroyed the family over money. Her version of events painted me as the villain who'd taken legal action against family instead of working things out privately. She conveniently left out the part about creating a fake investment fund and stealing my money. Some family members believed her story and started treating me like I'd overreacted to a simple misunderstanding. The family dynamics became incredibly strained. Holiday gatherings turned awkward, with clear divisions between those who supported my actions and those who thought I'd gone too far. My aunt started a campaign to portray herself as the victim of my greed and vindictiveness. But I also discovered allies within the family who'd suspected something was wrong with the investment fund from the beginning. My brother admitted that he'd never intended to contribute because the whole thing seemed suspicious. My parents, while initially disappointed about the family conflict, eventually acknowledged that my aunt's actions had been fraudulent and that I'd had no choice but to pursue legal remedies. The most challenging part was dealing with my aunt's continued harassment. She'd call me at all hours, leaving voicemails about how I'd destroyed family relationships over money. She'd send long emails explaining how the vacation home was supposed to bring the family together and how my legal action had ruined everything. She started referring to me as the family destroyer in conversations with other relatives. According to her narrative, I was the selfish nephew who'd chosen money over family bonds. She conveniently ignored the fact that she'd been the one who'd committed fraud and broken the family trust in the first place. Update 1. 3 months after gaining ownership of the cabin, I decided to visit the property to assess its condition and determine what to do with it. The drive up the mountain was beautiful, and I had to admit that my aunt had chosen a stunning location. The cabin was well-maintained and fully furnished, clearly representing a significant investment beyond my original $10,000. Walking through the property, I found evidence of my aunt's plans for family gatherings. There were photo albums with pictures of family members, a guest book where she'd apparently planned to have visitors sign in, and even a family tree artwork hanging in the main room. It was clear that she genuinely believed this property would become a family retreat. But I also found financial documents that revealed the full scope of her deception. The purchase price for the cabin was $65,000, and she'd made a $20,000 down payment. My $10,000 had covered half of that down payment, but she'd also used credit cards and a personal loan to finance the rest. The mortgage payments were substantial, and her financial records showed that she'd been struggling to keep up with them. It became clear that she'd been counting on the other family members to contribute their promised amounts to help cover the ongoing expenses. I realized that my aunt hadn't just committed fraud. She'd also put herself in a precarious financial position by overextending on a property she couldn't afford. The family investment fund hadn't just been a scheme to get my money. It had been her desperate attempt to make an unaffordable purchase seem feasible. This discovery actually made me feel somewhat sympathetic toward her situation, even though it didn't excuse her fraudulent actions. She'd gotten caught up in the dream of creating a family gathering place and had convinced herself that the ends justified the means. I decided to have one final conversation with my aunt to see if we could resolve the ongoing family tension. I called her and suggested we meet to discuss the situation like adults. She agreed, though her tone suggested she was still angry about losing the property. We met at a neutral location, and I tried to explain my perspective. I told her that I understood her vision for the family cabin, but that she'd gone about it in the wrong way. I explained how betrayed I'd felt when I discovered that I'd been the only contributor and that she'd used my money for her personal purchase. Her response was a mixture of defensiveness and regret. She admitted that she'd made mistakes, but insisted that her intentions had been good. She claimed that she genuinely believed the other family members would contribute and that she'd planned to formalize the investment structure once everyone was on board. But she also revealed something that surprised me. She admitted that she'd been struggling financially for years and that the vacation home had represented her attempt to create something positive for the family while also securing her own financial future. She'd hoped that the property would appreciate in value and eventually provide returns for everyone involved. I told her that I appreciated her honesty, but that her financial struggles didn't justify committing fraud. I explained that if she'd been upfront about her situation and her real plans for the property, we might have been able to work out a legitimate arrangement. The conversation ended without resolution, but I felt like I better understood her motivations. She wasn't just a greedy relative trying to steal from family. She was someone who'd made poor financial decisions and had tried to solve her problems through deception. Update 2. 6 months after our conversation, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to sell the cabin and distribute the proceeds among the family members who'd been promised a stake in the original investment fund. The property had appreciated in value since the purchase, and after paying off the remaining mortgage and covering legal expenses, there was enough money to give each family member who'd been part of the original plan a meaningful return on the investment they'd never actually made. I called a family meeting to announce my decision. I explained that while my aunt's methods had been wrong, her vision of a family investment that would benefit everyone had merit. I told them that I was selling the property and would distribute the proceeds as if they'd all contributed to the original fund. The reaction was mixed. Some family members were grateful and saw it as a generous gesture that helped heal the family rift. Others were suspicious of my motives and wondered if I was trying to buy back their approval. My aunt was notably absent from the meeting, having declined to attend. But the decision felt right to me. I'd never wanted to profit from my aunt's fraud, and turning the situation into something that actually benefited the family seemed like the best way to move forward. It also sent a clear message that my legal action had been about principle, not money. The sale process took several months, but eventually, I was able to distribute checks to each family member who'd been part of the original investment plan. The amounts weren't huge, but they were substantial enough to show that the family investment concept could have worked if it had been handled honestly. My aunt's reaction to the distribution was complicated. She called me after receiving her check, and for the first time since the whole ordeal began, she seemed genuinely remorseful. She thanked me for including her in the distribution despite everything that had happened and admitted that she'd been wrong to handle things the way she had. She also revealed that she'd been seeing a financial counselor to address the money management issues that had led to her poor decisions. She acknowledged that her financial stress had clouded her judgment and that she'd convinced herself that her deception was justified because she'd intended to benefit the family. The conversation was emotional, and while it didn't completely repair our relationship, it felt like a step toward healing. She stopped calling me the family destroyer and began acknowledging her role in creating the conflict. Update 3. A year has passed since I distributed the proceeds from the cabin sale, and the family dynamics have largely returned to normal. The initial anger and division have faded, replaced by a more mature understanding of what happened and why. My aunt and I have rebuilt a cordial relationship, though it's different from what we had before. There's an underlying awareness of what happened that prevents us from being as close as we once were, but we can interact at family gatherings without tension. She's continued working with her financial counselor and has made significant improvements to her money management. She's also been more transparent about her financial situation with family members, asking for help when she needs it instead of trying to solve problems through deception. The other family members have expressed appreciation for how I handled the situation, particularly the decision to share the proceeds from the property sale. Several have told me that they learned important lessons about the importance of following through on commitments and being honest about financial capabilities. Looking back, I realized that the whole experience taught me valuable lessons about family, trust, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. My aunt's fraud could have permanently damaged our family relationships, but by addressing it directly and ultimately finding a way to turn it into something positive, we were able to emerge stronger. The family destroyer label that my aunt initially gave me has become something of a family joke. At recent gatherings, relatives have jokingly referred to me as the person who destroyed the family's tolerance for financial dishonesty. It's become a reminder that sometimes destroying something broken is necessary to build something better. I've kept detailed records of everything that happened, not because I expect similar problems in the future, but because the experience taught me the importance of documentation and clear communication in family financial matters. If anyone ever proposes another family investment opportunity, I'll be ready with questions, requirements, and safeguards that could have prevented the original problem. The mountain cabin is now owned by a young family who uses it for weekend getaways and summer vacations. Sometimes I drive past the area and think about my aunt's original vision of family gatherings and shared memories. While her methods were wrong, the dream of bringing family together wasn't inherently bad. It just needed to be built on honesty and genuine commitment rather than deception and false promises. In the end, I don't regret taking legal action against my aunt. It was the right thing to do, and it ultimately led to a resolution that benefited everyone involved. Sometimes being the family destroyer means being the person willing to tear down dishonest structures so that honest ones can be built in their place.